The murmur of distant water still lingered long after the storm had gone, a ghostly reminder of what had been lost. The valley lay still, hollow and wounded, as if nature itself was mourning. Tu Tien stood barefoot in the thick mud, rainwater pooling around her ankles, her hair plastered to her tear-streaked face. Her gaze was fixed on the swollen river that had devoured their home, their crops, their dreams. The farm was gone, every fence they built, every field they tended, every fragment of peace they had carved from hardship. Only hours earlier, it had been a haven of sunlight and laughter. Now, it was nothing but ruin. Jack stood a few steps behind her, soaked to the bone, his breath shallow and uneven. Disbelief hung between them like mist. They had worked endlessly, under scorching sun, through nights of exhaustion, to make this land bloom. He had promised her that here, in this quiet valley, they would finally find rest. For a time, they had. The little farm had been their world. Each morning, Tu Tien would rise to the crow of roosters and the warmth of dawn spilling across the floorboards. Jack would already be outside, sleeves rolled up, tending to the earth with a steady rhythm. When he looked up, their eyes would meet, his smile quiet, but full of love. The morning smelled of wet soil, roasted coffee, and new beginnings. The work was endless, yet they welcomed it because it was theirs. They planted trees, built pens for animals, and dug irrigation channels by hand. When Jack's mother visited, she would laugh softly, saying the land seemed alive, as if it's breathing your love. Even Mr. Dung, often stern and distant, would linger by the fence, his expression softened by pride. Tu Tien cherished every inch of that place. She would hum while feeding the goats, or tend the flowers by the porch with quiet joy. Sometimes Jack would pause from his labor just to capture her in that morning light, calling her his living proof of hope. She'd blush, pretend to scold him, but deep down she believed it. The farm wasn't just a home, it was redemption. After years of chaos, they had found calm. When the barn was finally finished, they celebrated with Jack's mother and Mr. Dung. The sunset bathed everything in gold. The table overflowed with vegetables from their garden, freshly baked bread, and a bottle of wine saved for this moment. Laughter filled the air. "You two," Jack's mother said fondly, "have turned earth into happiness." Tu Tien leaned on Jack's shoulder, her heart full. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. That night, before they drifted to sleep, Jack whispered, "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." She smiled, her hand resting on his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her fingers. But outside, the air was shifting. The next dawn carried a strange stillness. Clouds hung low and heavy, and not a single bird sang. Jack looked toward the horizon, unease shadowing his face. "A storm's brewing," he muttered. Tu Tien stood on the porch, a chill running through her. The air tasted of rain and warning. By noon, the radio crackled with an announcement. Severe rainfall expected. Residents near rivers should prepare for flooding. Jack turned down the volume, brushing it off with forced calm. "We'll be all right. The house sits high." Yet, as the hours passed, the sky darkened into something monstrous. By evening, thunder rolled through the valley, and the rain came like a solid wall. Jack rushed outside to secure the animals, shouting over the roar. Tu Tien followed, clutching a lantern, her voice trembling. "Jack, please come in." "In a moment," he shouted back, fighting against the wind. The storm howled, bending the trees until they splintered. Inside, the power failed. The house plunged into darkness, water seeping under the door. Tu Tien whispered prayers, her voice quivering. Jack burst through the door, drenched and panting. "The stream's rising faster than I thought," he said, trying to steady his hands. "It'll pass soon. We just need to wait." But the storm only grew wilder. The rain hammered the roof in relentless rhythm. Through the window, Tu Tien watched their fields vanish beneath surging water. The river had turned into a beast, devouring everything in its path. When Jack opened the back door, their small bridge was already gone, swept away like paper. The cries of animals echoed through the wind. Jack turned to go back out, but Tu Tien grabbed him, her tears mixing with the rain. "Don't go, please." Before he could respond, a thunderous roar shook the earth. The mountain above them had given way. A torrent of mud and water surged down toward their home. "Upstairs!" Jack shouted. They stumbled up the steps, clutching the rail as water crashed through the lower doors. Within minutes, the first floor was submerged. Jack held Tu Tien tightly, both shaking as the house groaned under the pressure. Through a broken window, they watched their world drift away. The chicken coop, the garden fence, the shed. Tu Tien covered her mouth, unable to speak. Jack, our farm. He stared out at a wooden box floating past, the one that once held their wedding photograph. A flash of lightning illuminated it as it spun away, vanishing into the flood. Jack felt something inside him break. No amount of effort, no strength, no promise could stand against that fury. Yet even then, his arm never left her shoulders. The world below them was drowning, but he held her close, whispering the same vow he had made under gentler skies. We'll face it together. Rewritten version. The rain. The rain did not end with the night. It lingered into dawn like grief that refused to fade. The sky remained a deep gray bruise, heavy with what it had already unleashed. Tu Tien sat motionless in the dim loft, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes blank from sleeplessness. Each creak of the house sounded like a cry for mercy. Beside her, Jack's flashlight quivered in his hand as he searched the dark through the small window. What had once been their farmyard was now a wide, raging river. The coop had disappeared. The garden, where she and Jack once knelt side by side planting seeds, was gone, swallowed whole by the flood. Even the animals they had tended with such care were nowhere in sight. A cow drifted past, limp and silent, turning slowly in the muddy current. Tu Tien turned her face away, pressing her palms to her ears, but the world's sorrow still found her. Jack's eyes followed the storm as though it were an enemy. Every sound, the snapping wood, the crashing water, cut through him. He had built that farm board by board, promising it would be her safe haven. Now it was being erased before his eyes, and he could do nothing. The water's still climbing, Tu Tien whispered, her voice nearly lost in the roar. He leaned toward the staircase. The first floor had vanished beneath a thick, swirling mass of water. They had only one way left, upward. Jack reached for the old axe in the corner, once just a tool for chopping firewood, now their only escape. He struck the ceiling until the panels cracked open and cold air poured in, sharp and raw. Climb up, he urged, lifting her by the hand. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. The roof was slick beneath them as they crawled to the top, clutching at the beams. When they looked out, there was nothing familiar left, only endless water reflecting a bruised sky. Tu Tien began to weep quietly. The fields, the roads, the orchard, all gone. The world they had built together had dissolved into mud and silence. Jack sat beside her, his expression hollow, remembering the joy that once filled this place, the smell of fresh soil, her laughter echoing across the valley, the promise of a simple, good life. I thought we had time, he murmured. She shook her head. No one could have known. You did your best. But guilt burned through him like fever. Every drop of rain felt like accusation. He remembered the day he swore before his mother that he would protect Tu Tien, that he would never let her suffer again. Now she sat trembling beside him, soaked and pale, and he could not even keep her warm. Time dragged like years. The rain did not stop. Hunger gnawed at them, cold bit into their fingers. Tu Tien leaned against him weakly, whispering, I can't feel my hands. Stay awake, he said softly, wrapping her in his arms. Please, stay with me. He held her close, whispering promises even as doubt hollowed his chest. In the distance, thunder rolled away into the mountains, and at last the sound of the flood began to fade. By morning, the sky broke apart, letting in a pale, uncertain light. The worst has passed, Jack said, his voice rough but hopeful. They climbed down from the roof as the waters withdrew. Each step sank into cold, heavy mud. Around them lay what was once their dream, shattered boards, tangled wires, and the broken remains of their tools. Tu Tien knelt in the muck, her fingers trembling as she touched the ruined earth. All of it, she whispered. Everything we built is gone. Jack said nothing. There were no words big enough for loss like this. He simply knelt beside her and drew her close, their silence speaking what language could not. Then, faintly, from beyond the drowned fields, came a low hum, the sound of an engine cutting through the stillness. Jack looked up. A rescue boat was approaching. He waved desperately until the figures on board saw them. Wrapped in coarse blankets, they were lifted from the wreckage and carried away. Tu Tien turned for one last look. The place that had once been their refuge was now only a smudge on the horizon, half submerged and fading beneath the mist. Her tears fell freely. It's all gone, she said. Jack pressed his forehead to hers, his words quiet but steady. Maybe so. But we're alive, Tien, and as long as we're alive, we can begin again. The wind carried their voices away, leaving only the sound of receding water and the faint promise of morning breaking through the clouds. When the fury of the storm finally faded, the valley fell eerily still. The air hung heavy, as though even the earth was holding its breath. Where once there had been fields full of green and promise, there now stretched only mud, fragments of timber, and silence. The barn that had echoed with life lay broken, its roof caved in. The white fences Jack had built with pride were nowhere near where they once stood, scattered and splintered across the valley floor. Tu Tien stood motionless at what remained of their front yard. Her soaked dress clung to her skin. Her hair was tangled with rain and dust. In her shaking hand, she lifted a small splintered board. It was part of the cradle Jack had built for the child they had once dreamed of. The sight hollowed her chest. Her tears fell soundlessly, as if even grief had lost its voice. Jack waded toward her through the muck, each step sinking deep. He didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. He simply stopped beside her, his eyes tracing the wreckage where their laughter once lived. For a while, they stood there, shoulder to shoulder, the silence between them filled with unspoken pain. The land had taken everything back, but somehow, they still had each other. When Mrs. Loy and Mr. Dung arrived, they froze. What had once been a proud homestead was now a ghost of its former self. Mr. Dung's face went pale, disbelief clouding his eyes, while Mrs. Loy pressed trembling fingers to her lips, whispering prayers that trembled in the wind. Tu Tien turned to them, trying to smile through her tears, but her lips quivered before she could form the gesture. The older couple rushed forward, wrapping her in their arms, wordless but full of sorrow. Jack stood apart for a moment, staring up at the gray sky. His voice cracked as he whispered, "It's all gone." Mrs. Loy stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Not all, son," she said softly. "You still have us, and you still have her." That evening, as the rain thinned into a mist, the four of them sat together on what was left of the porch. No roof, no walls, just the open air and the scent of damp earth. Tu Tien leaned her head on Jack's shoulder. He felt her fingers curl around his hand for the first time since the storm began. They didn't speak about rebuilding or money or loss. They simply watched the rain fade into silence. And in that quiet, something faint but living stirred inside them, a small seed of hope born from ruin. Days turned to weeks. When the sun finally returned, Jack and Tu Tien began again. They gathered broken planks, salvaged what they could, and buried what they could not save. Their faces were lined with exhaustion, their movements slow, but there was resolve in every gesture. Neighbors came to lend hands, and soon the rhythm of life returned in humble ways. One morning, as golden light spilled across the valley, Jack paused, looking out over the land that had nearly taken everything. "We'll rebuild," he said quietly. "Maybe smaller this time, maybe simpler, but we'll make it home again." Tu Tien looked up, her eyes still shadowed by loss but touched now by warmth. She smiled faintly, as if testing the shape of hope once more. From above, the scene might have seemed still, four people standing among the ruins, surrounded by the remains of what once was. Yet beneath the destruction, something unbreakable endured: faith, love, and the stubborn will to rise again. And as the wind swept through the valley, carrying the last scent of rain away, it whispered a truth older than the storm itself, that even in the aftermath of destruction, love always finds a way to survive. Thank you for joining this story. If it touched your heart, share your thoughts below. Jack and Tu Tien's journey will go on, not just through the storms, but through every quiet sunrise that follows. Until next time, take care, and may peace stay with you.